A crowded courtroom buzzed with hushed murmurs as a teenage boy stepped forward, his posture straight and his face calm despite the intimidating atmosphere. He was young, far too young, it seemed, to be standing in front of a judge in such a serious setting. The courtroom was filled with attorneys, court officials, and spectators, all watching with curiosity. Some were amused, others skeptical. What was a teenager doing here, alone, without a lawyer by his side? At the front of the room, Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, looking down at the boy with a smirk. His white hair and deep-set wrinkles told stories of years spent presiding over cases, passing judgments, and controlling his courtroom. He leaned forward slightly, his voice laced with sarcasm. "Son, do you know where you are? This isn't a school debate club." Laughter rippled through the room, mostly from a few attorneys sitting off to the side. The boy remained silent, his face unreadable. The judge sighed and glanced at the paperwork in front of him. "It says here you are representing yourself. Surely this is a mistake. Where is your attorney?" His voice carried a mixture of disbelief and amusement. He had seen many cases, but this? A teenager standing in as his own defense. It was unheard of. The boy finally spoke, his voice steady and clear. "Your Honor, I am my own attorney." The room fell silent for a moment, then erupted into another wave of chuckles and whispers. Even the court clerk raised an eyebrow. Judge Harrison let out a short laugh. "You're telling me you're a lawyer now." He shook his head, tapping his gavel lightly. "This is ridiculous. I should hold you in contempt for wasting the court's time." But the boy didn't flinch. He reached into his bag and pulled out a neatly organized folder, placing it on the table in front of him. "I assure you, Your Honor, I understand the legal proceedings, and I am well within my rights to represent myself." His tone was polite yet firm. The judge's amusement started to fade as he watched the boy with growing curiosity. He had expected nervous stammering hesitation, something that proved this was just a foolish stunt. But there was none of that. Instead, there was confidence, a quiet authority that didn't match his age. The opposing attorney, a middle-aged man in an expensive suit, leaned forward with an amused smile. "Kid, I don't know what game you're playing, but this isn't a place for make-believe." He glanced at the judge. "Your Honor, may I suggest we put an end to this charade?" The judge nodded. "Agreed." He turned back to the boy. "I'll give you one chance to rethink this. Call a real attorney. Otherwise, I will dismiss this and move forward with the ruling." The boy didn't waver. Instead, he calmly opened his folder, pulled out a document, and slid it across the table toward the judge. "Before you make any decisions, Your Honor, I'd like you to take a look at this." Judge Harrison narrowed his eyes but took the paper. The moment he started reading, his expression shifted. The courtroom, still filled with quiet whispers, seemed to pause as they watched him. His smirk faded, his fingers tightening slightly around the paper. The opposing attorney leaned forward. "What is it, Your Honor?" he asked, his tone suddenly less amused. Judge Harrison hesitated before glancing back at the boy. For the first time since the trial started, he wasn't mocking. He wasn't smirking. He looked surprised, maybe even a little unsettled. Because what he held in his hands was something that changed everything. And suddenly, the boy in front of him wasn't just a teenager. He was something far more than anyone in the room had expected. The courtroom remained silent, all eyes fixed on Judge Harrison as he read the document in his hands. His face, once amused and dismissive, now held an expression of unease. The young teenager stood still, his hands resting calmly on the table in front of him, waiting for the judge's reaction. The opposing attorney shifted in his chair, growing impatient. "Your Honor, what exactly are we looking at?" The attorney asked, forcing a chuckle to break the tension. Surely it's nothing more than some legal jargon he copied from the internet. Judge Harrison didn't respond immediately. He exhaled slowly, tapping his fingers against the paper as he reread the lines carefully. Then his eyes lifted, locking onto the teenager standing before him. "Where did you get this?" he finally asked, his voice quieter, more measured than before. The boy's expression remained neutral. "I wrote it," he replied. A murmur swept through the courtroom. The attorneys sitting nearby exchanged skeptical glances, and even the bailiff leaned in slightly, intrigued. The opposing attorney scoffed. "You expect us to believe that?" he asked. A teenager wrote a legal motion this polished. Judge Harrison remained silent for a moment before setting the document down. "This isn't just any legal motion," he said. "It's structured perfectly, citing case law and precedents that most law students struggle to grasp." He studied the boy carefully. "Who are you?" The boy finally let a small smile tug at the corner of his lips. "My name is Jordan Williams," he said, "and I've spent the last 5 years studying the law." The courtroom was still. Judge Harrison leaned back in his chair, considering the young man before him. He had seen a lot in his career: seasoned attorneys making mistakes, self-represented defendants crumbling under pressure. But never had he seen a teenager stand before him with such composure, let alone draft a legal motion with the skill of a seasoned professional. The opposing attorney, still unconvinced, let out a dismissive laugh. "Studying the law? What does that even mean?" He turned to the judge. "Your Honor, this is absurd. He's a kid. He doesn't have a degree. He doesn't have credentials. This whole thing is a waste of the court's time." Jordan remained unfazed. "With all due respect, sir," he said, looking directly at the attorney, "credentials don't determine intelligence. Understanding the law does, and I understand it better than you think." The attorney scoffed, shaking his head. "You're telling me you just decided to study law on your own?" Jordan gave a small nod. "That's exactly what I did." Judge Harrison narrowed his eyes. "Why?" Jordan's expression grew serious. He placed his hands on the table, leaning slightly forward. "Because I had no choice," he said. "I learned the law because I had to. Because I've seen people taken advantage of simply because they didn't know their rights. Because I've watched families lose everything when they didn't understand the fine print. I didn't study law to play pretend in a courtroom. I studied it because I knew one day I would need it." For the first time, the confidence in his voice carried something deeper, something personal. The judge noticed it, the subtle weight in his words. The opposing attorney shook his head. "Even if that's true, none of it matters. He's still not a real lawyer. He has no license to practice, no formal training. This entire case should be dismissed before it even begins." Jordan didn't flinch. Instead, he reached into his folder again, pulling out another document. "I anticipated you'd say that," he said, sliding the paper across the table toward the judge. "So I took the liberty of preparing a rebuttal." Judge Harrison hesitated before picking it up. As he read, his eyebrows furrowed. Then, ever so slightly, his lips parted in surprise. The courtroom held its breath. Something had shifted. Whatever was in that document, it had changed the way Judge Harrison saw Jordan Williams. The boy was no longer just an unusual case. He was something far more unexpected. And for the first time since this trial began, it wasn't Jordan who was on the defensive. It was everyone else in the room. Judge Harrison's grip on the document tightened as he read through Jordan's rebuttal. His initial skepticism was giving way to something else, something he wasn't ready to admit yet. The room remained eerily silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. Even the opposing attorney, who had been quick to dismiss Jordan, now sat still, eyes darting between the judge and the boy standing before them. Jordan waited. He had expected resistance. He had expected to be doubted. But what he hadn't expected was the judge's reaction, an expression not just of disbelief, but of something deeper, almost reluctant admiration. This, Judge Harrison finally spoke, his voice measured. This is solid work. His gaze lifted toward Jordan, eyes narrowing as if trying to see through him. How did you even know to structure it this way? To counter every argument so precisely? Jordan didn't hesitate. Because I spent years reading through legal cases, breaking them down, analyzing every loophole, every technicality, he said. I know how the system works. I know how people like him, he nodded toward the opposing attorney, win cases by relying on people's ignorance. The attorney scoffed, but there was no denying the shift in the room. What had started as an open and shut case had suddenly become something far more complicated. The judge leaned back in his chair, pressing his fingers together as he considered his next words carefully. Let's be clear, Harrison said, his tone serious. Regardless of your knowledge, you are not a licensed attorney. You do not have the legal right to represent anyone in this courtroom. Jordan met his gaze evenly. I understand that, Your Honor. But I also understand that the law allows individuals to advocate for themselves if they choose. He took a small step forward. That's exactly what I'm doing. A few murmurs rippled through the room. The judge exhaled, looking back at the document in his hands. And you expect this court to take your argument seriously. Jordan didn't blink. I expect this court to follow the law. Judge Harrison studied him for a long moment before setting the papers down. He turned his gaze toward the opposing attorney. Counselor, do you wish to respond? The attorney, who had been quiet for too long, quickly straightened in his chair. Your Honor, this entire situation is ridiculous. We're entertaining a teenager playing lawyer. He might be smart, but he has no legal standing here. If we allow this, we're setting a dangerous precedent. Jordan smirked. Dangerous for who? The attorney shot him a glare. For the system. Jordan tilted his head slightly. Or just for people who don't like being challenged. The tension in the room thickened. Judge Harrison remained quiet, observing the back-and-forth exchange with sharp eyes. There was something undeniably unusual about this case, and he knew it. He wasn't the type to entertain theatrics in his courtroom, but Jordan's argument was more than just theatrics. It was well-founded. I'll allow the motion to be entered into record, Harrison finally said, causing a ripple of gasps and whispers from the crowd. The opposing attorney nearly jumped out of his seat. Your Honor, Harrison held up a hand. That doesn't mean I'm ruling in his favor, he clarified. But his argument is structured well enough to be considered. We will proceed accordingly. Jordan remained calm, though inside he knew this was a victory in itself. The first step had been taken, but he also knew the battle wasn't over yet. Outside the courtroom, news of the unusual case had begun spreading. Reporters were already gathering, intrigued by the story of a teenager taking on a legal battle usually reserved for seasoned professionals. Inside, the opposing side was already planning their next move, determined to prove Jordan wrong. But Jordan had been preparing for this moment for years, and he wasn't about to back down now. The courtroom remained tense, the air thick with anticipation. Jordan stood firm, his shoulders squared, his confidence unshaken. But he knew this wasn't just about proving a point anymore. This was about standing up to a system that had underestimated him from the moment he walked through the doors. Judge Harrison shifted in his seat, glancing toward the opposing attorney, who was clearly agitated. Your Honor, this is absurd, the attorney said, his voice tight with frustration. We are setting a dangerous example by allowing this to continue. The law is the law, and this young man, regardless of how articulate he is, should not be given the same platform as a trained attorney. Jordan's eyes didn't leave the judge's face. He could see the internal conflict playing out behind those tired, skeptical eyes. For a moment, it almost seemed like Judge Harrison was considering shutting it all down, putting an end to the trial right then and there. But then the judge exhaled slowly and leaned forward. "Mr. Carter," he said, addressing the attorney, "while I understand your concerns, the fact remains that the defendant has chosen to represent himself. And whether we like it or not, this young man has demonstrated a level of preparation that cannot simply be ignored." He turned his gaze back to Jordan. "That said, I hope you understand the weight of what you're doing." Jordan nodded. "I understand, Your Honor." The judge hesitated for just a second longer before making his decision. "Proceed." A murmur spread through the room like wildfire. Jordan could hear the whispers, the skeptical chuckles, the disbelieving scoffs. He knew people were watching, waiting for him to fail. But that only fueled his determination. The opposing attorney wasted no time. "Fine," he said, gathering his papers. "If we're going to treat this like a real case, then I won't hold back." He stepped forward, a smirk creeping onto his face. "Since you seem so confident in your knowledge of the law, let's see how you handle cross-examination." Jordan didn't flinch. He had expected this. The attorney's voice was sharp, cutting. "Tell me, Jordan, do you have any formal legal education?" Jordan met his gaze evenly. "No." The attorney turned dramatically toward the judge. "There you have it, Your Honor. No law school, no bar exam, no credentials of any kind. Yet we're supposed to take his arguments seriously." Jordan took a slow breath. "I don't have a degree," he admitted, "but I've spent years studying the law. I've read case after case, broken down arguments, analyzed legal strategies. You might have gone to law school, but that doesn't mean I don't know how to fight a case." The attorney chuckled. "Cute. But tell me this, can you name a single precedent that supports your argument? One that holds up in an actual court of law." Jordan took a slow breath. "I don't have a degree," he admitted, "but I've spent years studying the law. I've read case after case, broken down arguments, analyzed legal strategies. You might have gone to law school, but that doesn't mean I don't know how to fight a case." The attorney chuckled. "Cute. But tell me this, can you name a single precedent that supports your argument? One that holds up in an actual court of law?" Jordan didn't hesitate. "Hedian v. Wainwright, 1963, he said, his voice steady. "It ruled that even those without formal legal training have the right to defend themselves in court. The Supreme Court recognized that access to legal defense is a fundamental right." The attorney's smirk faltered. He hadn't expected Jordan to fire back so quickly. Judge Harrison raised an eyebrow. Impressive. Jordan pressed on. "The law exists to serve justice, not just those who can afford expensive attorneys." His voice carried through the courtroom, firm and unwavering. "You can question my credentials all you want, but the truth is, I've done my homework, and I'm ready to prove my case." The courtroom fell silent. The attorney clenched his jaw, realizing that Jordan wasn't just some kid playing lawyer. He was a real threat. But Jordan knew this wasn't over yet. The hardest part was still ahead. The attorney clenched his jaw, flipping through his papers with forced composure. He had underestimated Jordan, and now the entire courtroom could feel the shift in power. But he wasn't about to let a teenager outmaneuver him. He took a slow step forward, then turned to Judge Harrison. "Your Honor," he said, his tone suddenly calm, almost smug. "Since Mr. Carter is so well versed in legal precedents, let's put his skills to the test. I'd like to submit new evidence. Jordan stiffened. He hadn't anticipated this. The opposing attorney slid a thick folder across the table, his smirk returning. Judge Harrison studied it for a moment before nodding. Proceed. The attorney turned back to Jordan. You've presented yourself as someone who understands the law, someone who belongs here. But the truth is, you don't, and I can prove it. He held up a document. This, he continued, is a motion filed by the State Bar Association just this morning. It states that, due to the nature of this case, any ruling made while you are acting as counsel could be challenged and overturned on appeal. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Jordan's stomach tightened. This was a strategic move, not to prove him wrong, but to undermine his very presence in the trial. The attorney leaned in. Even if you win today, your case won't hold up. You're wasting everyone's time. Judge Harrison exhaled heavily. He glanced at Jordan, clearly weighing the situation. Mr. Carter, he said, you understand the implications of this, don't you? Jordan nodded, but inside he was scrambling. He had come too far to back down now. He could feel the doubt creeping into the room, see the small smirk of satisfaction on the opposing attorney's face. But then something clicked. He straightened his posture. Your Honor, he said carefully, if that motion is valid, then I'd like to file a counter motion. The attorney chuckled. A counter motion? Based on what? Jordan met his eyes. On discrimination. A hush fell over the room. Jordan stepped forward. This courtroom has allowed pro se representation before. People without law degrees have defended themselves in civil and even criminal cases. The only difference here is that I'm young. And because of that, my ability to present a legitimate defense is being questioned in a way that wouldn't happen to an adult. He turned to Judge Harrison. That's bias, Your Honor. And if this case is thrown out because of it, then we have a much bigger legal issue on our hands. Judge Harrison sat back, fingers pressed together. The weight of Jordan's words settled over the room like a thick fog. The attorney's confidence wavered for the first time. He hadn't expected Jordan to flip the argument against him. But before anyone could speak, the courtroom doors swung open. A woman in a sharp suit strode in, her heels clicking against the floor. Jordan turned, his heart stopping for just a second. It was his mother, and she wasn't alone. Behind her was an older man, one Jordan recognized immediately. A high-profile defense attorney. The attorney's face paled. He knew who this man was, too. Judge Harrison frowned. And you are? Jordan's mother held her chin high. I'm here as an observer, she said smoothly. And so is Mr. Grant. I believe he may have some insight into this case. Jordan felt his pulse quicken. His mother hadn't told him she was bringing in backup. Mr. Grant took a slow step forward. Your Honor, he said, his deep voice commanding the room, I've been following this case closely, and I believe Mr. Carter may be onto something. The opposing attorney swallowed hard. Jordan felt the stakes rise higher than ever. The fight wasn't over yet. It was only getting started. The courtroom was silent, the air thick with tension. Judge Harrison adjusted his glasses, glancing between Jordan, the opposing attorney, and the newly arrived Mr. Grant. It was clear that the balance of power had shifted. The opposing attorney forced a smile, but his confidence was cracking. Your Honor, while Mr. Grant's reputation is certainly impressive, this case is still about whether a teenager, someone who isn't a licensed attorney, should be allowed to argue in court. Mr. Grant cleared his throat. Actually, I believe the law is on Jordan's side. He placed a document on the judge's desk. Your Honor, I'd like to present a legal precedent. In a 1982 case, a minor successfully defended himself in a civil suit, and the ruling was upheld. As long as the individual demonstrates an understanding of the law and has the court's approval, they can act as counsel. Jordan's heart pounded. He hadn't expected such a solid defense. Judge Harrison read the document carefully, his expression unreadable. Finally, he looked at Jordan. "Mr. Carter, you have certainly proven that you are capable. I see no legal reason to prevent you from continuing." The opposing attorney clenched his jaw. His last attempt to discredit Jordan had failed. He turned toward his client, the wealthy businessman at the center of this lawsuit, who was now visibly sweating. Jordan exhaled slowly. "Your Honor, with the court's permission, I'd like to proceed with my final argument." Judge Harrison nodded. "Go ahead." Jordan stepped forward, locking eyes with the businessman. "You thought you could take advantage of people because of your power and status," he said firmly. "But today, the law is holding you accountable." He turned to the jury, laying out every piece of evidence in a clear, precise manner. Every contract, every fraudulent transaction, every false statement was exposed. The businessman shifted uncomfortably, his confidence vanishing with each point Jordan made. When Jordan finished, the opposing attorney scrambled for a rebuttal, but it was clear he had nothing left. His arguments were weak, his strategy falling apart. The jury exchanged glances, already convinced. Judge Harrison sighed, rubbing his temple. "I've heard enough." He turned to the jury. "Have you reached a verdict?" A juror stood up. "We have, Your Honor." He cleared his throat. "We find the defendant guilty of fraud and unlawful business practices." The courtroom erupted. Jordan's mother covered her mouth, eyes shining with pride. Mr. Grant gave him an approving nod. The businessman slumped in his seat, the weight of the verdict crashing down on him. The opposing attorney sank back, defeated. But just as Jordan felt the wave of victory washing over him, Judge Harrison raised a hand, calling for silence. His eyes were locked on Jordan. "There's one more matter to address," he said. Jordan stiffened. "Your Honor." The judge leaned forward. "Tell me the truth, Mr. Carter. Who trained you?" Jordan hesitated. "I studied the law myself." Judge Harrison smiled slightly. "Yes, but someone guided you. That level of skill doesn't come from textbooks alone." A slow realization spread through the courtroom. Jordan glanced at his mother, then at Mr. Grant. The older attorney's expression softened. "You already know, don't you?" Jordan finally said. Judge Harrison nodded. "I suspected when Mr. Grant walked in. You've been learning from one of the best defense attorneys in the country, haven't you?" The room gasped. Mr. Grant chuckled, placing a hand on Jordan's shoulder. He didn't need much guidance, just a little direction. Judge Harrison sighed, then smiled. "Well, Mr. Carter, if this case is any indication, I'd say the legal world has a future star." Jordan grinned, the weight of everything finally settling in. He had done it. He had won. And he had proven that justice wasn't just about age, power, or status. It was about truth. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Jordan stood still for a moment, taking it all in. The weight of what had just happened settled over him, not just the victory, but everything it represented. He had walked into that courtroom underestimated, dismissed, even mocked. But now he was walking out having changed the course of someone's life, proving that justice wasn't about age or status. It was about standing up for what was right. His mother approached him, her eyes filled with pride. "I knew you could do this," she said softly, squeezing his hands. "Your father would have been so proud." Jordan swallowed the lump in his throat. His father had always believed in him, even when the world didn't. And now, standing here, he felt like he had honored that belief. Mr. Grant gave him a nod. "You've got a future in this, kid." If you ever decide to take the bar early, give me a call. I'd be happy to mentor you officially." Jordan smiled, the idea of becoming a real attorney no longer feeling like some far-off dream. The defeated businessman was escorted out of the courtroom, his arrogance completely gone. His expensive suit, his connections, none of it had saved him. Justice had prevailed, and this time money hadn't been enough to escape it. As Jordan and his mother stepped outside, reporters swarmed him. Microphones, cameras, flashing lights, all of them eager to hear about the teenage legal prodigy who had just outsmarted seasoned professionals. But Jordan wasn't looking for fame. He simply wanted people to know that the law could work for everyone, not just those who could afford it. He spoke carefully, choosing his words with purpose. "This wasn't just about me," he said. "It was about proving that the law is for everyone, that no one should be above it. No matter how much money or power you have, the truth will always matter." His words struck a chord. The story spread quickly, inspiring people from all walks of life. Young people saw that they didn't have to wait to make a difference. Families struggling against injustice felt hope that the system could still work for them. And those in power, they were reminded that their physicians weren't untouchable. In the days that followed, Jordan's story became a symbol of justice. Law firms reached out with offers, universities wanted to speak with him, and communities came together to celebrate what he had done. But to Jordan, the real victory wasn't in the recognition. It was in the lives he had touched, the change he had sparked. One evening, as he sat at his desk, flipping through the case notes one last time, his mother walked in. "So, what's next?" she asked. Jordan leaned back, a thoughtful smile crossing his face. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I do know one thing, I'm just getting started." And with that, the young genius who had once been doubted, dismissed, and mocked, closed his notebook, ready for whatever came next.